Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Book Talk episode, part of the Geeks and Barbells network. I suppose it could be called a network. Podcast, Book Talk, gonna get into anime talk, gonna get into so much, especially once I receive my mic and webcam, because this is not working quality-wise. We will improve, people. We will improve. Uh, so today I wanted to talk about something that sort of came up in my last video of Harry Potter, where I was discussing the transition from book to film, and I really thought it would be cool to kind of jump into one of the biggest issues with translating books to films. Now, before we even get into that, there's one caveat, and that is very simple. Do you believe that when a book is turned into a film, it should be exactly the same? This is a big argument. This is something that's been hashed about online for God knows how long. And it really depends on your viewpoint. If you are a diehard fan and you believe that exactly every single piece of the book should be brought into the film, that is one thing. It is extremely difficult. Now, I'm going to be focused a lot on fantasy books, although I'd like to talk about other styles of writing as well as we go along. Philosophy, poetry, all sorts of kind of stuff. And I do believe, as someone who really, really is passionate about books, especially about fantasy novels, I really, really want it to be as closely adapted into film or television. Unfortunately, it is very difficult. It is extremely difficult. I've sort of thought about this quite a bit, and I thought the best way to get around that would be to use more animation, which I made a podcast about. You can check it out. I really think it is one of the best unused ways that we can properly translate fantasy and science fiction stories into television or film. It is through animation. It is extremely difficult to do with real people. That being said, if the people who are making the film, especially if the author is involved, pretty much come out and say this is based off of, this is an adaptation, it's not going to be exactly the same, we're going to have to change things for the film, and there's some stuff that we find could be done in a different way and we'd like to explore them in the film, cool. People might not like it, but the author, the director, the producers have come out, said it. Okay, we still want it to be done as well as possible. So, for example, sometimes this actually turns out well, at least in my opinion. So for anyone who's watched Altered Carbon on Netflix, I'm a huge fan of Altered Carbon. And when I read the book, it's actually a trilogy of books. Uh, did he continue past the third book? I don't know. I think there's only 3. And I gotta say, I don't like the book. I really don't. Spoiler alert, but now this is possible that it is something that happens in the second or third book and that something shifts, but the enemy in the first book as compared to the first season of the series, it's not his sister. These huge twists, the emotional state of the character, even him being awoken 200 years later in the, or 250, something like that in the show, it's actually only a couple of years in the book. And so all that depth, that emotion, that shock to his system as everything has changed. Even the fact that he was an envoy is very, very different in the book series. So everything that gave so much depth to the character, so much emotion, so much like difficulty when you see like where he came from familially and job wise, everything, it's all gone in the book. It's all gone. It's a decent book, but the show was better. It was better. Now, if you like the show or not, that's up to you. But when I compare the two, show is definitely better. That being said, as I said in my Harry Potter escapade that I did the other day, I do not believe the films were done well. I just don't. Now, Part of that you can say that especially the first film, the second film, they were done quite a long while ago. Uh, we didn't have the same quality of CGI and money in the industry that we do now. Uh, the actors were extremely young; they were new, so there was a lot that just was not done well. I had a way of reading the novels, and when I saw the characters in the film, they just didn't play out. I didn't like the way Hagrid's character was portrayed. I didn't like Dumbledore's character. I think that's partly an actor issue. The actor in the first film, I think, is phenomenal. The actor who was taken for the preceding films, not my style. I found a lot of things were rushed, even in just the way people were speaking to each other. And this gets into the main issue, and it becomes even more problematic with fantasy and science fiction as well. Because in fantasy, especially good fantasy, character development is huge. It is huge. Now, world building, all those elements are extremely important as well, but you want to be in your character's head. You need to understand the development of the character, because in many fantasies, a character starts at one point and by the end of the book is in a vastly different place. Many times from a power perspective, from a physical perspective, an emotional perspective. It's sort of like childhood to adulthood. It's a huge swath of development. And when you're taking just a book about normal people, regular day to day, it is a lot easier to show that in film, even if you're not getting everything that's happening in their head. Whereas with fantasy, you lose so much of the character trying to figure out these incredibly complex scenarios or deep scenarios. And that's problematic. It's extremely problematic. Now, you have some shows like Game of Thrones where they manage to make it work. Why? I think because for two reasons. There is problems with Game of Thrones, but one, a lot of characters. By having a large cast of characters, you don't have to fully develop one individual or a smaller group of characters in the same way. You can kind of space that out so people forgive the lack of full development of one singular character. Two, and this is a main plot, but you see this with The Witcher. The Witcher had less characters, so they were able to develop a little bit more, but The Witcher made up for it with just some pretty, as far as I'm concerned, pretty wicked action scenes. Like, they did well. And Game of Thrones did a lot, maybe not so much with large combat scenes, although they did have quite a few. But it's just there was always something or someone dying. Something fucked up was always happening in Game of Thrones. So it had a level of action to it. But not all fantasy is like that. A lot of fantasy builds, and sometimes builds very slowly. It's one of the reasons I'm very afraid for the film adaptation and TV show adaptation of The Name of the Wind, the Kingkiller Chronicles, because a huge amount, even though there is a lot of stuff happening to, I don't know if I'm going to say his name right. It's Koth. It's difficult to say his name. There is a lot happening to him, but a lot of it is in his head. A lot of what makes his character fascinating is how he is dealing with situations in his head, how he's remembering things that he learned here, there, using them to manipulate scenarios so that he can survive, because he has had shit handed into him over and over and over again, and he's just getting through it with his brilliance, but he is still a child, and so you need to see that development. I don't know if that translates well onto screen, especially for people who've read the book and then go to watch it on screen and they lose 50% of what drew them into the book. That is the problem when you take a book and try to make it into a film. His Dark Materials. Not only was the movie really badly done in terms of acting and certain things, but just one of the most fascinating things about Lara as a character was kind of like how she was dealing with stuff in her head. She was a very young female character, and she lost it all. when it got made into film. Just lost almost all of it. Um, I've heard that there is the TV series that has come out, the British one, and I've heard pretty good things about it, so I'm hopeful. I do have to check it out. But for the film, no. Aragon, pretty decent book. Horrendous film. Just horrible. The Dark Tower did not do well as a film. I have not read the book yet, still have to. So there is a lot of unfortunate things that get lost when you translate a book to a film. In the Harry Potter series, they pulled out so much that was in the book series, and many times changed scenes, and I could not for the life of me understand why they changed the scene. There was no fundamental reason why to shift a scene, but they did. It wouldn't have cost more money. It wouldn't have taken more time. They simply just changed plot points or changed the way a scene is portrayed, and it was shittier. Not only because they were not being true to the book, but also just it would have been better. So I think that is something that everybody needs to think about when they are trying to adapt adapt a book to a film or a TV series. They need to understand that, first of all, if you're going to change something, why are you changing? It has to make sense to people who enjoy the book. You have to understand that. Number two, if you are adapting a series that is not action heavy, how are you going to portray everything that is in your character's head and actually make us be able to develop alongside him in the same way that we were drawn to in the book series? Because that is one of the biggest things that draws people to fantasy. It is the character development. If we cannot see our character's development, how it's happening in his head and how it's affecting him and the world around him, that's unfortunate, and you're going to lose a lot of us. So we really need to talk about that. We really need to think about it. And I'm really hoping with things like Wheel of Time being adapted now that they are taking that hugely into account, because it is a massive series, absolutely massive, with huge amounts of characters, lots of character development, and if they screw it up, everyone's going to hate them. I'm going to keep this short today, make another video, maybe really delving more deeply into this kind of stuff, but I just want to rant a little bit. So as always, stay geeky, stay healthy, love books, and yeah, be happy.